Before we dive into this amazing Wild West tale, I want to hear from you first. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from Dallas, Denver, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, or maybe even from across the ocean in London or Sydney? I love seeing how far these stories travel, and every comment makes this journey feel even more connected. The prairie was breathing in slow sighs when Elias Boone guided his horse across the fading light. The day's dust clung to his coat, the ache of silence pressing in as heavy as the leather saddle beneath him. He was 35, though the years had carved more than lines across his brow. They had hollowed the man, left him a figure who spoke little, who found comfort only in the soft lowing of cattle and the lonely whistle of wind. He carried the weight of an existence measured in chores, not in meaning. And that evening, he believed the ride home would end like every other, with a cold supper and another night of silence by the fire. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, a broken echo carried through the scrub brush. Elias slowed his horse, listening. Coyotes, he thought, but the tone was different, high, ragged, threaded with terror. He tugged at the reins and turned toward it, unease threading through his chest. The cry came again, sharper now, words nearly drowned by distance. He caught fragments. "Please help my baby." Something inside him stilled. He slid from the saddle, boots crunching against brittle grass, and pushed through a stand of cottonwoods near the dry creek. And there, in the half-light, he saw her. A woman lay collapsed in the dust, a rough burlap sack tied cruelly around her shoulders and arms, pinning her as if she were nothing more than a bundle to be discarded. Her dress was torn, her dark hair plastered to her temples with sweat. Her body heaved in the rhythm of someone close to giving birth. She looked scarcely able to draw breath, yet her eyes, startling, luminous with fear and defiance, locked onto him the instant he appeared. "Please," she whispered, voice frayed and trembling. "Untie the rope. My baby is coming." Elias froze. The air between them seemed to quiver, as though the world itself held its breath. He knew her people. The town whispered about them with disdain, a steady current of suspicion that had seeped into his own bones over the years. Helping her would brand him in those same whispers, make him a man judged and set apart. He imagined the muttered voices in the saloon, the narrowed stares from men who measured worth by bloodlines and boundaries. But as he stood there, hesitation gnawing at him, her lips parted again, desperate. The sound was not a plea for him, it was a plea for life itself. And suddenly the shame he carried shifted. What kind of man would leave a mother bound and dying in the dust? He knelt beside her, the leather of his gloves creaking as he drew his knife. The rope was coarse, biting into her skin. With one swift cut, it gave way. The sack fell aside, and she gasped as though air itself had been returned to her. He steadied her, careful as if she were porcelain, his hand at her shoulder. "My name is Elias," he said softly, almost afraid his voice might break the fragile stillness. She swallowed, still trembling, and whispered, "Ayanna." Her name lingered in the air like a vow. She told him, haltingly, that raiders had dragged her here, tied her, and left her to die. The words cost her effort, every syllable rode on shallow breath. Elias listened, each detail striking him harder than the last, and with every word he felt the grip of his old indifference loosening. He slipped an arm beneath her and lifted her from the ground. She was light yet heavy with the burden of the child pressing toward the world. For a man who had spent years avoiding closeness, the weight of another life against his chest was almost unbearable. His pulse thundered in his ears, not from exertion, but from the realization that her survival now rested in his hands. He carried her to his horse, cradling her with an awkward reverence. She leaned against him, too weak to resist, her cheek brushing the rough fabric of his coat. He mounted carefully, pulling her with him, positioning her before him on the saddle. One arm wrapped firm around her waist, the other holding the reins, Elias guided the horse into motion. The land stretched empty before them, shadows deepening as night claimed the sky. Every hoofbeat echoed the urgency of her shallow breaths. She clutched at his arm once, a fleeting touch, not of affection but of raw instinct, as though her body knew before her mind that he was now the barrier between life and death. Elias said nothing more, but inside something shifted. He had long believed himself built for solitude, destined to fade quietly into the background of the West. Yet now, with this fragile woman in his arms, he felt a stirring he could not name. The road ahead promised danger and hardship, perhaps even ruin. Still, he knew there was no turning back. The night swallowed them as they rode deeper into the wilderness, the woman's labored breathing against his chest, the child within her straining to arrive. Elias did not know where the path would end, only that it had already changed him. For the first time in years, he felt the fire of purpose burn within. And with that fire came a question he could not answer. What price would he pay for the life he had just chosen to save? The horse's breath came in plumes of steam as Elias pressed it hard through the night. The prairie stretched endless and dark, the stars sharp as needles above them. Against his chest, Ayana's body tensed with waves of pain, her hands clutching at his sleeve when each contraction seized her. He spoke little, only murmured words to steady her, though fear gnawed at his gut. He had never delivered a child, never even held one. Yet here he was, carrying not only a woman, but the fragile promise of life she bore. By the time they reached the foothills, the sky had turned a deep indigo, and the wind carried the scent of rain. Elias guided the horse toward the memory of an abandoned miner's cabin he had once stumbled across. When the outline of its slanted roof appeared against the horizon, relief washed over him like cool water. He slid from the saddle, lifted Ayana carefully into his arms, and shouldered open the warped wooden door. Inside, the air was heavy with dust, but the walls held firm. It would have to be enough. He laid her gently on a blanket pulled from his pack, then lit a small lantern, its glow flickering across her drawn face. Ayana's breaths came fast and shallow. Sweat slicked her brow, and when she gripped his wrist, her strength startled him. She whispered through clenched teeth, "It is time." Elias swallowed hard, a surge of panic rising. He boiled water in an old tin pot, tore strips from his own shirt for cloth, moved with a desperate clumsiness that betrayed his trembling hands. The storm broke outside, rain hammering the roof as lightning flared. Each crack of thunder mirrored the raw cries filling the cabin. He knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her shoulder when fear threatened to pull her under. "You're not alone," he said hoarsely. "I'll see you through this." Hours seemed to stretch into lifetimes. The storm raged, and within the cabin time slowed to the rhythm of her cries and his ragged reassurances. Then, at last, a sound unlike any other pierced the air, a thin, sharp wail that carried more power than thunder. A child's first cry. Elias blinked against the sudden sting of tears, scarcely believing the fragile bundle in his hands. He wrapped the newborn in his coat and placed it in Ayana's trembling arms. Her eyes, heavy with exhaustion, glistened as she pressed her cheek to the child's head. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice breaking on the edge of relief. Elias sat back on his heels, chest heaving, as though he too had just fought his way into a new life. Something inside him shifted beyond repair. He had thought himself a man bound to silence and solitude, but now he saw clearly there were things worth breaking the silence for. When dawn came, pale light spilled through the broken shutters. Ayana slept, her child tucked safely beside her. Elias stepped outside into the wet morning, the ground softened by rain, and breathed in the scent of earth washed clean. But peace was brief. In his mind's eye he saw the town, saw the men who would sneer at him for what he had done, the women who would whisper behind their hands. The West was not kind to those who crossed invisible lines, and Elias had crossed one boldly. Yet when he returned to the cabin and saw Ayana stirring awake, saw the small fist of the newborn curl against her chest, all doubts quieted. He offered her water, and when she drank, their eyes met. No words of affection passed between them, but in that gaze lay something heavier than love spoken aloud. Trust, gratitude, the spark of something that might one day grow. Days later, when Elias led his horse back into town with Ayana, and her child riding beside him, the whispers began just as he had imagined. Men spat tobacco in the dust, women turned their faces, muttering. That Boone's lost his sense, taking in one of them. The judgment cut sharp, but Elias did not lower his head. Ayana walked tall, shoulders squared though her steps were weary, and the baby's cry rose above the murmur of disdain. For all their venom, not one dared speak louder than that child's voice. Elias knew the road ahead would not be easy. Yet in that moment, surrounded by scorn, he felt something he had not in years, purpose. He looked down at the infant nestled in Ayana's arms and realized the truth. He had not simply delivered a child into the world. He had delivered himself from the prison of his own silence. The West would judge them, perhaps even try to break them. But for now, in the fragile dawn of this new life, Elias carried no shame. Only a quiet fire, the kind that could outlast any storm. And as the wind stirred dust along the street, he knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a story yet to be written, one that no gossip could erase.